Hello there and good afternoon. This is Al24 World News streaming live from the capital Algiers, and these are your headlines. King Charles III was publicly proclaimed Britain's new monarch on Saturday in a modern form of Anglo-Saxon ceremony that was on screen for the first time. Russia has abandoned its main stronghold in northeastern Ukraine after Ukrainian forces made a rapid advance. Swedes vote Sunday in legislative elections that will either pave the way for an unprecedented right-wing government supported by the far right or a third straight mandate for the ruling Social Democrats. In Iran, Western Algeria, a generational networking forum was launched to support joint Arab action organized by the Algerian National Observatory for Civil Meeting. Hello again and welcome. First in our topic on news, a procession carrying Queen Elizabeth's coffin left Balmoral at about 10 a.m. local time, allowing thousands who lined the route to bid a final farewell to the country's longest-serving monarch. The Queen's coffin will be held from Balmoral Castle to Edinburgh. King Charles III was officially announced as Britain's monarch, a ceremony going back to the ancient tradition and political symbolism. The ceremony was for the first time broadcast on TV. Nabil Khazini.
In a historic ceremony for the world's newest king, Charles III was officially declared sovereign. With cameras allowed into the event, a first glimpse of an ancient ceremony dating back centuries was given to the world. He was settled in as head of state, with the daunting task of succeeding a very popular monarch, respected for her sense of duty and for having preserved the monarchy throughout her reign, the longest in British history.
Even as we grieve, we give thanks for this most faithful life. I am deeply aware of this great inheritance and of the duties and heavy responsibilities of sovereignty, which have now passed to me.
2 days after his mother's death, Charles III appeared in good spirits, often sharing a joke with those he was seen chatting with. To mark the accession of King Charles, the Honourable Royal Artillery Company carried out a 62-gun salute at the Tower of London. In Parliament, British lawmakers lined up to swear oaths of allegiance to the kingdom's new king.
I swear by Almighty God that I will be faithful and bear true allegiance to His Majesty King Charles, his heirs and successors, according to law, so help me God.
Although he is already king, Charles' coronation will take place at a later date, and the timing for that is not yet clear.
Her Excellency British Ambassador to Algeria Sharon Waldell has expressed her deepest sadness following the death of Queen Elizabeth II, voicing her gratitude for solidarity of Algerian people as well as the message of condolences of President Abdelmajid Tebboune.
We were all deeply shocked and saddened at the announcement of the death of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II on Thursday. Our collective thoughts and the thoughts of people around the world are very much with King Charles III and his family. Everyone remembers warmly her visit to Algeria in 1980, soon after the devastating earthquake. I know that she visited one of those that were, many of those that were affected at the hospital during that visit. And I've also been deeply touched by the affection shown by the Algerian people towards Her Majesty the Queen. I am most grateful for all the messages of condolence that we have received, and I particularly extend my thanks to the President and His Excellency the Foreign Minister for their kind words at this very sad time.
And to have more on the newly crowned King Charles III, I'm joined live by Mr. Mark Blow, expert on the international affairs and relations from Italy. Mr. Lowe, many argue that Elizabeth II leaves a space behind that is unlikely to be filled. In other words, King Charles III has bigger shoes to fill. How do you read this?
I would agree with you entirely. Queen Elizabeth II was undoubtedly an excellent example of how a British monarch should progress in her duties and responsibilities. So, in addition to that, there is also the fact that she was very well loved and appreciated throughout the United Kingdom, the Commonwealth, and indeed throughout the world. So it will be a very, very hard role for Charles III to follow. And we also have to remember that the level of affection, the level of sympathy for Queen Elizabeth II isn't 100% shared as regards Charles III. So he will have a very, very difficult task in front of him, also in a particularly difficult moment, not only in terms of global affairs, but also in terms of internal affairs. For example, the Scottish First Minister, Sturgeon, is absolutely adamant that she will do her very, very best to hold another referendum on Scottish independence. So in all probability, Charles III will be on the throne in a moment in which there is a risk of the United Kingdom becoming, how can I put it, less united. So indeed, it would be a very, very difficult task for him to progress as his mother progressed.
Very good indeed. Just to elaborate more on that, Mr. Lowe, at this stage of his life, 73 years old, and with the country so fragile in so many other ways, he may have to serve his term more or less as a reforming king. What's your perspective on this?
Well, again, I have to agree with you. Without a shadow of doubt, this will be the moment in which to discuss a number of reforms in regards to the role of the monarchy, and even the number of members of the royal family that have the so-called working role, the frontline role. There has already been a reduction in the number of working royals, and it's only to be expected that this number will be further reduced. Another potentially interesting aspect is the fact that while his mother was on the throne, under no circumstances whatsoever was anybody prepared to raise the issue in Parliament of a partial, even a small reform to the roles and the duties and the format of the royal family. This may very well change, and it will be very, very much an issue in which the royal house will have to be involved 100% with Parliament, and not Parliament, beg your pardon, not government, but Parliament, because any debate whatsoever on a reform will have to include members of the government and the opposition. So that will be something that I certainly will be monitoring very, very closely. Very, very interesting. This is the moment in which, if there is to be any form of reform, it will happen, and presumably in a relatively short time span.
Mr. Mark Lowe, you join me live from Italy. Thank you ever so much for this explanation.
Thank you.
To Russia-Ukraine fight now, Ukrainian authorities claimed retaking ground in the eastern region of the country after the Russian forces announced the withdrawal of their troops. Ukraine confirmed recapturing around 2,000 kilometers of the territory that was occupied by Russian forces. Osama Ayadi.
Ukrainian military has regained control of more than 30 settlements which were occupied by Russian soldiers in the region around Kharkiv since the first days of the Russian military operation in Ukraine. It was reported that over the past 24 hours, Russia had fired 13 missiles and conducted 23 airstrikes on targets in Ukraine, hitting infrastructure and a number of settlements.
Протягом минулої доби ворог завдав
In general, in recent days, more than 1,000 square kilometers of Ukrainian territory have been liberated from the occupiers. In some directions, units of the defense forces wedged themselves into the enemy's defenses to a depth for up to 50 kilometers.
Новосілка, Нескучне, Вільне поле.
Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky announced that his country's armed forces had reclaimed some 2,000 kilometers from Russian troops since September and accused the Russian army of demonstrating the best that it can do, showing its back.
Рух наших воїнів на різних напрямках.
The movement of our soldiers in different directions of the front continues. To date, as part of active actions since the beginning of September, about 2,000 kilometers of our territory have already been liberated.
Армія цими днями демонструє найкраще, що вміє.
These comments by Ukrainian leaders came as Russia's defense ministry announced that it is pulling back its forces from two areas in Ukraine's Kharkiv region, explaining that the troops would be regrouped from the Balaklia and Izium areas in the Donetsk region.
In order to achieve the stated goals of the special military operation to liberate Donbass, a decision was made to regroup the Russian troops stationed in the Balaklia and Izium regions to build up efforts in the Donetsk direction.
Ukrainian Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba held talks with his German counterpart Annalena Baerbock in Kyiv. She pledged further military aid to Ukraine, adding that in concrete terms the support will consist of further supply of heavy weapons.
We will continue to vigorously support this hope for freedom, for peace, and for a life and democracy as part of our common European family, for as long as you need us. In concrete terms, this means, as you have already said, that we will continue to supply Ukraine with weapons, with heavy weapons.
The fighting in the east comes amid an ongoing offensive around Kherson in the southern Ukrainian region. Analysts suggest that Russia may have taken soldiers from the east to reinforce around Kherson, offering the Ukrainians the opportunity to strike a weakened front line.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky warned at Yalta European Strategy International Forum in Kiev that Moscow hopes to break the Ukrainian resistance in winter by counting on heating problems in Ukraine.
Russia is doing everything to break the resistance of Ukraine, Europe, and the world during the 90 days of this winter. That's what Russia hopes. That's its last argument. Winter violence is supposed to help when human violence is not enough.
And for more explanation on these counteroffensives, I'm joined live by Mr. Ivan Verstyuk, editor at the New Voice of Ukraine from Kiev. Mr. Ivan, how could the Ukrainian troops manage to make this counteroffensive all of a sudden, where the Russians were in control of the regions in the east as well as in the south?
What was surprising is the pace of advancement of the Ukrainian army in the east. For the past 5 days, our army was advancing for at least 50 kilometers a day, which is considered to be a very quick advancement. And, you know, Ukrainian commanders, they usually tell the soldiers that maybe they should take a day of rest or something, but the soldiers are so enthusiastic about the counteroffensive operation that they're just unstoppable. They keep moving, especially when they see the civilians in the liberated towns and villages and how happy they are when the Ukrainian army conquers the city. That like drives them emotionally and they keep on going. Well, what's important is that this advance in the east, it was indeed surprising for many in Ukraine because people were preparing themselves for like 3 more months of stalemate in the east, and now we're having these territorial gains, which is also inspiring for our troops in the south and in the Donbass area, which is extremely important. Russia was unprepared for, you know, all kind of warfare that the Ukrainian army is using. In the east, there is a so-called Donetsk Special Operations Unit of the Ukrainian army, which is very, very experienced and is able to conduct all kinds of things, whether this is air defense, whether this is...
Mr. Ivan, I'm sorry to cut your train of thought, but would these attacks bring more success for Ukraine to overcome the Russian army in the eastern part, precisely the Donbas region?
I think if the current pace of advancement goes on, then we'll be able to liberate the rest of Ukraine's sovereign territory by the end of the year. And our next big thing is going to be Crimea. Russia has strengthened its defense line near Crimea, putting more troops there who are also well trained, like Marines, like Russian Marines, who are going to be defending the Crimea. And Ukraine also has a large army group in the south. So if before the current advance in the east, we were preparing and thinking of one more year of the war, now I think the war is, and ending the war is a matter of months, not years, which is optimistic not only for us here in Ukraine, because we are losing lives of the people, but also for the whole world that is facing the food crisis and the energy crisis.
Mr. Ivan, thank you so much for this explanation. You joined me live from Kiev. Thank you ever so much for this. In Iran, a Western Algeria Generational Networking Forum was launched to support joint Arab action organized by the Algerian National Observatory for Civil Meeting Forum, which will continue over a period of 5 days. The forum is witnessing intensive participation by experts, former diplomats and activists in the association movement from 20 Arab countries.
إن بلادنا العربية تزخر بطاقات شبانية هائلة وبفعاليات مجتمعية نشطة.
Our Arab country is harnessing the tremendous energetic youth and active societies. The future must be the people imbued with their civilizational, historic and cultural values in order to be able to confront the attempts to destroy our Arab generations and kill their hopes and ambitions.
لكي تتمكن من مواجهة محاولات تدمير أجيالنا العربية وقتل آمالها وطموحاتها.
To a different matter now, Iran's foreign ministry described as regrettable a joint statement released by Germany, France and the United Kingdom, saying that they had serious doubts about Iran's intentions to renew a 2015 nuclear deal, as Iran has sent this month its latest response to the European Union's proposal to text to revive the agreement under which Tehran had restrained its nuclear program in exchange for relief from US, EU and United Nations economic sanctions. North Korean leader Kim Jong says his country's nuclear status is now irreversible after Pyongyang passed a law declaring it was ready to launch nuclear strikes.
By enshrining the policy of nuclear force in law, our country's status as a nuclear weapon state has become irreversible. Now, to change our nuclear policy, the world must change, and the military and political context on the Korean peninsula must evolve. It is totally out of the question to renounce nuclear weapons, and there can be no denuclearization or negotiation.
Sweden is holding a legislative election on Sunday that will either result in a third consecutive term for the ruling Social Democrats or unprecedented right-wing administration supported by the extreme right. Islam Seed.
Sweden is holding votes on Sunday to elect lawmakers to the 349 seats, as well as to local offices across the country. A contest pitting the center-left Social Democrats, the first party in Sweden since 1930s, against a right-wing party in an effort to regain power after 8 years in a position. Battling gang crime, inflation, the energy crisis and integration problems of immigrants took center stage of the campaign.
We have many foreign people here and a lot of crime. Yes, rape women, rob children, and this Swedish democracy is against that. And we also want to throw these criminal people out of country, out of the borders.
The outgoing Prime Minister, Social Democrat Magdalena Andersson, seeks to secure a third term of 4 years for the left by depending on red-green package. Ulf Kristersson, the leader of the moderates, is her greatest adversary, since he believes he's the only one who can unify the right and unseat her.
the rise of the far right, what we have seen during the last 4 years is that the Conservative Party have spent so much time and effort to try to convince Swedish people that the Sweden Democrats aren't the party that they actually are. And they show it again and again and again. Also during this election campaign, where so many on their lists do have racist opinions and racist backgrounds.
According to opinion polls, the Sweden Democrats appear to have just surpassed the moderates as the second largest party behind the Social Democrats, which placed the center-left in a close race with a right-wing bloc.
Our polls now show, outside of the margin of error, that the Swedish Democrat will be the second biggest party and then be bigger than the moderate party. And that shifts everything upside down. The Swedish Democrats have increased for every election quite substantially, and they are slowly moving into the warmth of being a serious party in Sweden, and they therefore would expect more influence.
In a proportional system, where only parties with more than 4% of the vote receive seats, a total of 349 seats are up for grabs. A prime minister needs to receive a majority of votes. Nonetheless, he or she must not have 175 or more votes cast against him.
Thousands of Croatian anti-government protesters gathered in Zagreb on Saturday holding banners calling for many demands ranging from the cost of living crisis and energy prices to the pending adoption of the euro set for January 2023. As America remembers 9/11 with moments of silence, U.S. President Joe Biden marks the 21st anniversary of the attacks at the Pentagon on Sunday. President Joe Biden plans to speak and lay wreath at the Pentagon, while First Lady Jill Biden is scheduled to speak in Chancellorsville, Pennsylvania. Vice President Kamala Harris and her husband are due to go to the World Trade Center in New York. New York declared a state of disaster emergency Friday after poliovirus was detected in the wastewater samples from Long Island, signaling growing community spread of the virus, which can cause paralyzing disease. The virus was found in another 50 collected samples, and state health officials said this was clear evidence that polio is spreading. Secretary General Antonio Guterres, visiting flood ravaged in Pakistan, says he has never seen climate carnage of this magnitude. Guterres then stopped at some of these makeshift camps and met desperate flood victims, saying that it is one of the worst humanitarian crises of the 21st century.
We have declared war on nature. And as we see here in Pakistan, nature is striking back with devastating consequences. Climate change is supercharging the destruction of our planet. I've seen many humanitarian disasters in the world, but I have never seen climate carnage on this scale. I have simply no words to describe what I've seen today. A flooded area that is 3 times the total area of my own country, Portugal.
Dozens of girls about the 6th grade in the province of Paquita took to the streets on Saturday after being deprived of attending school. The girls demonstrating on the streets criticized the closing of girls' school and again requested that the Islamic State reopen the institutions. According to the China Earthquake Network Center, a 7.6 magnitude earthquake hit Papua New Guinea on Sunday morning. The quake was felt strongly in the capital, Port Moresby, with buildings and vehicles being damaged. However, no casualties have been reported so far. More than 18 people died on Saturday when a bus carrying passengers caught fire after it crashed with a tank loaded with fuel. The accident occurred in the northern state of Tampola lost at dawn. The trapped passengers burned to death into the bus when the tank fuel was spilled over after the crash. Since Lebanese economy collapsed in 2019 after decades of corruption and mismanagement, the state has been unable to provide electricity for more than an hour. As a result, the state has opted for solar energy.
The inhabitants of the village of Tula, located in the mountains of northern Lebanon, will finally be able to treat themselves to ice cream for the first time in 2 years. A real luxury in a country crushed by heat and eaten away by power outages.
It's been 2 years since the kids have been asking for ice cream, but it's finally time, thank goodness. Today or tomorrow, we'll have ice cream for the first time in 2 years.
These volunteers worked with the municipality to power the village generator with solar energy, reducing fuel costs while powering the village.
With the current conditions in which we live in Lebanon, solar energy is no longer an alternative, it is a necessity.
Housewife Zaina Said claiming she paid about $6,000 to install solar power in her Beirut apartment last summer. When the state lifted most gasoline subsidies, she was then the only one in her building to have passed the milestone and still depended on a subscription to a generator. This year, 9 neighbors joined her, covering the roof with metal bars.
We saw that the power problems would be long. Diesel was getting problematic. Shipments were delayed. I can't go without light. And the batteries aren't very efficient. So we opened the solar panels.
Many Lebanese had to sell their car, jewelry, or land to finance this change. And before the crisis, only a few companies offered solar energy installations. But the strong demand had opened the roof for anyone who wants to sell their solar systems.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for being with us. For more updates, you can follow our pages in the social network media. Bye-bye. See you.